Jill, and thank you everybody for joining us, and special thanks to Tim and Joe for joining us today. Since I'm starting off, let me give you a little introduction to myself. I know we have many new attendees who haven't been to one of our monthly webinars before. I am Ben Schmerler, Director of Strategic Operations at DP Solutions. We are a managed IT services company based out of Columbia, Maryland, and we serve generally the Mid-Atlantic region, but also national clients as well. A little bit about what I do, my background. I spend a lot of time on the technology side when it comes to cyber risk, cybersecurity, compliance management, et cetera. I run our phishing testing and security awareness training programs. You may have read some of the articles and stuff I've published or seen some of my public appearances talking about managing risk and cybersecurity. So today we thought we'd do something a little bit different for this panel. I wanted to invite the insurance experts on. I understand about insurance in the abstract, probably much like many of you, but my day-to-day is on the technology side. So we thought we'd have these guys in, talk a little bit up front about preparing for cyber insurance, but then get into a lot of common questions and things you guys might be concerned about when it comes to getting cyber insurance, making sure that you have the right coverage, so on and so forth. And better to hear it from the experts than from me. So anyway, I'm going to get it rolling. Tim and Joe are going to have a little bit more formal intro when we get to their stuff. But let me get started with a little bit of an introduction. So one thing that's really important about technology management in general and data management, especially as we move forward into a world where people are really working anytime, anywhere from any device, is that proper technology management is required to limit risk. We can't just expect these products and services to just do things for us and be perfect and eliminate all of our risks without some sort of intervention. We can't be passive about it. If we have our heads buried in the sand, inevitably we're going to be one of those targets for a cyber hack of some kind and potentially have serious costs to our business, costs to our reputation, maybe legal troubles, so on and so forth. You can't escape risk, and cybersecurity is inherently imperfect. So sometimes people come to me and they say, hey, Ben, you know, we don't want to be the next Colonial Pipeline. We don't want to be the next Baltimore County Public Schools or GBMC or some of these people who have had ransomware incidents. What stuff can I buy or what can I do so that this will never happen to me? And unfortunately, the answer is nothing. There is no 100% foolproof solution, just like there's nothing 100% foolproof about health insurance or healthcare or personal health. Just like there's nothing perfect about, you know, financial planning or other things that are inherently risky. Everything we're going to talk about today is about minimizing risk, doing the right things up front so that if something does happen, we have the proper precautions in place and are able to recover. Disaster recovery planning needs to include safety nets. So, we can do a lot on the proactive side, and I'll get into that in a minute in terms of technology management, patching, backups, et cetera. But we can't just expect these things to work. Sometimes these products are flawed. Sometimes people act outside the boundaries of technology, so on and so forth. So we need to have something that's sort of our, in case of emergency, break open glass solution. And then ultimately, even though it's been around, I guess, for a little while now, in the broad scheme of insurance, which is a very old business, cyber liability insurance is a relatively new concept. And a lot of the people who are purchasing these policies are new to it. Maybe they've had multiple homeowners insurance policies or auto policies or business, property casualty insurance, all sorts of different insurance policies. Well, the cyber liability piece may be new to many people. So it's really important to educate yourself on it. So for today's agenda, we're just going to have a little moderated panel where we're going to talk about how to navigate cyber liability insurance. So first, and this is the part I'm going to talk a little bit about, is having an insurable environment. Much like anybody else, these insurance companies do not want to insure people who have a very casual approach to technology. If it's inevitable that you're going to be hit with all these breaches and such, you're not going to be a very insurable customer. You want to be in a position where your environment's well protected so that people will want to work with you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about a few scenarios involving data breaches or security incidents and liabilities. So you've probably heard about things in the news. I'm going to not just talk about that stuff, but also get into a few more personal examples so that, I imagine a lot of the people here are not involved in Fortune 500 companies and big things you hear about in the news, but there are many situations that we can all relate to within our communities and with similar peers. We're going to talk a little about where cyber insurance falls relative to other business insurance. I know that's a hot topic for a lot of people, as well, where does this match up with my other insurance? And what aspects of this insurance fit you? So not, like anything else, everybody needs a different kind of product. And probably most importantly, because at the end of the day, this is about getting you the information you need, is your Q&A. So we have some moderated questions today, but as I mentioned before the webinar started, if there's anything at all you want to learn about cybersecurity, cyber risk, getting good insurance, so on and so forth, please be sure to put that question in, and we'll try to address it here today on the panel, or if not today, we can talk about it offline in a future date. So here's where I come in. I'm going to talk a little bit about being prepared for cyber liability insurance. So, insurance is really meant to cover these negative scenarios, but if the expectation is that you're going to have a negative scenario because you're being negligent, you can't be covered, right? Nobody's going to want to insure an environment running super old stuff or stuff that's been completely, that's a ticking time bomb, so to speak. So at a minimum, there's a few things that you should have in order to be to meet best practice and have an insurable environment. And indeed, these are the sorts of things that are going to come in applications and cyber checklists before you begin getting your policy. So the first thing is, and it may come as a surprise, is supportable modern technology. It's hard to secure a network where everybody's running old versions of Windows XP, or you're running a cable modem that's 15 years old, or running old 10100 switches that have known flaws in them, or what have you. So technology has to be in a supportable place so that we can fight off a lot of the threats that exist in perpetuity around us. We're all surrounded by cyber threats all the time. It's a matter of what our technology blocks out. You need to be in a position with supportable technology that will deal with these common threats. Multi-site data backups. So, you may have your data located on a PC locally or a laptop locally, maybe a server or a NAS or some other kind of local device. You may be utilizing your data and storing it in the cloud with, say, Microsoft Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, or Google, or some of these other providers. But no matter where you store your data or where you keep your data that you manage, that is really the lifeblood of your organization. These computers and servers and networking equipment, these are all just parts. The data is really where the value is. So we need to make sure that this data is protected not just in its day-to-day home, but also in another location where we could recover to if necessary. A general plan for maintenance and support. Now, this is very broad. There's a lot of ways that you may need to maintain and support technology. It's going to vary for each user, but in general, you need to make sure that your systems are patched and updated, that there's consistent reviews of the technology in place to make sure that you're keeping up to date, that you have things like spam filters, antivirus, et cetera, that these products are updated and modern. You need to make sure that things are configured properly and that you're giving everyone the right correct rights and level of access, that things are not configured in such a way to lead to potential breaches, so on and so forth. And good maintenance and support will provide you that. I mentioned this a little bit before, reasonable standards for authentication and rights management. This is extremely important today. A lot of times, and I'm sure everyone's seen this in their emails or perhaps with a personal account they manage, it's very common that passwords are cracked and that accounts are compromised. We should really be looking at things like multi-factor authentication and making sure that once someone is logged in, that they have the proper level of access, so that if someone's account is compromised, that someone hasn't gotten the treasure trove to all the most important things in our organization. Basic security tools. So this again will vary based on the organization, but you'll certainly need things like antivirus or anti-malware. We even offer endpoint detection and remediation solutions. Spam filtering, patch management. You may be utilizing encryption at rest, taking data that's located on a physical device and making sure it's encrypted in case that device is stolen. Or you need to have things like encryption in transit, so that if you're working, all your staff is working in different locations, maybe they're working from home, that the data transfers that happen between individuals and different entities within your organization is all encrypted and unreadable over the public internet. This isn't an exhaustive list. The things that are right for you are going to be different than for somebody else, but we need to cover these bases before we can really be an insurable environment. So with all that said, I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to allow our guests to introduce themselves today. These are our panelists. I got into the technology stuff a little bit, but these are the insurance experts. These are the guys you want to talk to. So why don't we start with Joe? Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
So Ben, I'm going to do something unusual for me because I'm in sales, is I'm going to actually ask you to say one more thing before I start talking, because usually I like to fill the air and talk myself. But one thing that I think was missing on that last slide, but I think you mentioned some of already, can you add one more thing to that being prepared that we insurance companies would love for you to talk about, is maybe the training that every employee needs to have? You mentioned the phishing training, and I think one of the other things you do as well. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that could be a bullet point in and of itself.
You're absolutely right, and I probably should have added in that previous slide, which is everybody on your staff needs to have general security awareness training. We're not going to create an organization of security engineers. These guys aren't going to be, counter hackers and stuff like that are working for you. But what we do want is people who are engaged and active and aware, so that when they get an email that comes in and that email is a little sneaky or suspicious, or it's asking them to do something like transfer money or click through a link or install something or whatever, we want people that are engaged and aware and care about what they do, so that they avoid making those missed clicks. A lot of the cyber incidents that we hear about in the news start with bad clicks and bad touches by people. And if we can get people to minimize those sorts of things, it's hard for people to be perfect, but if we can get people to minimize those bad clicks and bad actions that they take, we can be a lot further along. So thank you, Joe. I really think that was a good point.
Yeah, that is something that I would echo, that we see a lot of as well. So just want to make sure we made that point, because really one of the things we like to point out when we talk about insurance and being ready for these type incidents is it can't just be the C-suite who's thinking about this. Every employee from the top down needs to be aware of what the issue is. So after that, I'll now get to what Ben asked me to do, which is introduce myself. So I am Joe Gates. I work for an insurance company called Beazley. Like these other gentlemen, I spend a lot of my time thinking about and talking about network security and privacy, mainly from the insurance side. But I am tempted and prone to boring people at parties, like I did this past weekend at a graduation party, with all kinds of information they never wanted to hear about cyber security and why they shouldn't click on these links and why they shouldn't be sharing things on social media. But that's just, that's what we have done. As Ben said, this is a new insurance coverage. So I spend most of my days educating the brokers who sell this to make sure they understand it, because unlike, as Ben said, property insurance or something along those lines, this coverage has not been around very long, and there's still a lot of lack of understanding among the public as to exactly what they need this coverage for and why they need it. So hopefully we'll be able to clear up a little bit of that for you today, and hopefully we can answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thanks, Joe. And just a reminder to the audience, if you run into Joe at a party, don't ask him to talk about anything. Otherwise, he'll talk about insurance instead of the Orioles or something else that you might be looking to talk about. All right, Tim, you're up.
Good morning. As Ben mentioned, my name is Tim Girard. I'm with R.K. Independent insurance agency and brokerage located right here in Baltimore, Maryland. Family owned and operated. I want to thank Joe from joining us from Beazley, in addition to Beazley, represent many other carriers, but Joe's a good buddy and has volunteered his time to really talk, any technical to us. And the reason why I wanted to kind of, bring this to DP Solutions is, cyber liability is relatively new, and what we've seen at our agency level over the last couple of years has almost zero claims activity to more claims activities from a cyber liability standpoint than I would have hoped or even wished on anybody. So, when we're dealing with our customers, what we're seeing is most tend to be confused and frustrated as to the need of cyber liability insurance. And with so much, cyber attacks in the news, what we're seeing is a lot of our customers are just completely overwhelmed and concerned, could it happen to them? And my goal and the goal of my team at R.K. is really to be a valuable resource and kind of connect the dots. I think Ben mentioned it earlier when he was speaking. All the IT solutions that you guys have in place still is never 100% effective against, some sort of cyber attacker or data breach. So that's where we kind of come in play, as a broker and agent, to help advise and kind of guide our customers kind of through the process, and then reaching out to our carrier partners, like Joe from Beazley here.
All right, thanks, Tim. All right, well, great. Thank you for the introductions. Let's move on to a few of the questions. These are some of the commonly asked questions that we run into when it comes to cyber liability insurance. So the first thing, and this is a big one, is and we'll make it a two-parter here. So what is cyber liability insurance in general? And then what does general liability typically cover on the technology side, and sort of where does it fit in? I think this is probably a big one that a lot of people in the audience like to know about.
Well, I think I'll start with the first one there, and Tim, jump in for anything I leave out. But cyber liability insurance in general, if we go back 8 years, really what we concerned ourselves with was e-commerce liability. So companies that had websites where they were selling things over the internet had a big exposure. And the other big exposure was any company that stored a lot of data that was either personally identifiable information or personal health information. And that's really what we talked about 8 years ago. So all of our buyers were those who were selling things over the internet, collecting credit cards, or those who were storing data and were connected to the internet and therefore could lose that data. But what it's evolved into over the past 7 or 8 years, thanks to new things like ransomware, is in addition to those, we've also got ransomware or other forms of cyber extortion. There's business interruption that can stem from that. There's data restoration to cover the cost to restore your data from those backups if you fall victim to a security or data breach. There's regulatory defense and penalties if you're in a healthcare industry and you're a healthcare covered entity, if you're doing business with or soliciting business from those who live in the European Union. There's GDPR. There's PCI fines and penalties if you take credit cards, reputational risk to restore your reputation or the losses of your business due to the data breach and the negative publicity. And then in addition to that, we've even got a small amount of crime coverage on our policy as well. So it's really kind of evolved, as Tim has said, in a lot over the last few years, but it's really designed to cover the liabilities and the first-party financial losses that come with doing business over the internet, being connected to the internet, and relying upon your computer systems, which could become a victim of a security or a data breach.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, which is the reliance side. So how the industry shifted from data liability and things like that, things that people probably quickly think of when maybe they think about insurance, but it's a lot about just your reliance on the systems. Imagine if somebody just pulled the rug from under you on your technology and all of a sudden you can't work. I mean, who cares necessarily? Sometimes the people who are doing these ransomware attacks, they don't really care about the data that you're dealing with. Some do. Some want to exploit it and sell it. But oftentimes they know that you care about it, which is why they're doing this ransomware. They're taking a hostage from you. So really important point. Do you have anything to add there, Tim, or should we keep moving on this?
Keep moving.
All right, great. So the next question is sort of a who is liable question. So and this was sort of a commonly asked sort of scenario, so let's get into it. So if I accept credit cards via a credit card processing company, have I transferred the risk associated with collecting PII to them? And by extension, if not, what am I responsible for?
So I think this is another one that I'm going to handle here. If you accept risk by a credit card and you have a credit card processing company that's handling that for you, it comes down to who is the data owner. And of the 50 states that have their own individual data privacy laws, all of them state that the data owner is the one who is responsible for that data. So the question of who is the data owner just comes down to who does the customer, who does the consumer believe they're doing business with.
Wow.
The example I always like to give is Joe's Pizzeria. So when Tim walks into Joe's Pizzeria to buy his pizza.
Is that your pizzeria, Joe?
That's my side job,
Okay.
I've got a lot of people to talk to about insurance, so I opened a pizza place so I could talk to the customers that come in about their insurance as well. So when Tim comes into the pizzeria to buy his pizza, he pays Joe with his credit card. Joe uses credit card processor XYZ. Tim doesn't know he's done business with credit card processor XYZ. He does not have a first-party relationship with credit card processor XYZ. That's just a data processor that Joe has hired in order to process those credit cards. So most state laws will say that the one who owns that data, the one who has the first party relationship with that consumer, is the one who has the legal responsibility to notify that consumer.
Right.
Most state laws will consider that credit card processor to be what's called a data processor. Their only legal responsibility, according to most of those state laws, is to contact Joe and say, Joe, I'm sorry, we lost all of your data. Unfortunately, you're out of luck.
Right.
Now, there might be a contractual indemnity there, but the legal responsibility relies or lies with Joe and his pizzeria.
Yeah, well, like many things in life, it doesn't necessarily need to be fair. It's a matter of responsibility. You may not have done anything directly wrong. However, you have a business partnership with those who are running those cards.
Correct, and that's what it comes down to. Is the business owner has a responsibility to his consumers to vet that vendor and make sure that vendor is going to handle his PII, his personally identifiable information, in a secure manner.
Yeah. And it may be worthwhile to talk real quick about just the concept of PII, so personally identifiable information. It really could be anything. It's a very broad term. Anything that could tie an identity to something sensitive. And it's a good catch-all because it could cover, obviously healthcare is its own thing, and so is credit card numbers and things like that. But I think you could probably make a case for a number of pieces of other information, names, addresses, personal histories, etc., that could be considered PII. So I would imagine many people on this call have some kind of PII that they're managing, whether they'd like to think so or not. So, all right. Well, that was really good. Anything else to add, Tim? I know I'm giving Joe a lot of time, so I'll just keep moving.
That's perfect. He's our technical guy here, so we're super happy.
So since Tim doesn't have anything to add, Ben just made a comment that I think is fantastic, which is there are differing state laws that define PII differently. One of the things that we like to explain to potential insureds is while a law might not necessarily consider it PII now, it might in the future. So one of the things we like to talk about is because the data that you store in a computer doesn't take up space quite the same way that those filing cabinets that we used to all have did, a lot of us tend to collect things that we don't need and store them. I'm a perfect example. I've taken thousands of pictures of my kid. Most of them are probably blurry or out of focus, and I kept them all because they don't take up a whole lot of room, right? They're not like the boxes of pictures we used to have. But the problem is in the future, a court might decide that that information is PII. And an example is in California, there was a court case where a data breach exposed clients' zip codes, which if you think about the days when they used to drop phone books off on our front stoop, that had people's names and addresses, including zip code in it. But nowadays, when we go and pay gas at the pump in Georgia, we're having a hard time finding gas right now, but when we can find it, you use your credit card at the pump, you put in your zip code, sort of like a PIN number. So it's almost a PIN number for your credit card. So it does serve as a piece of information that could cause financial harm. So one of the things we like to point out is if you don't have a business reason for storing this data, you may want to purge it from your network because otherwise you could be held liable should that information become public.
Yeah, even further beyond that, as from a technology perspective, the more you have, that's more data you have to store. You have to buy volumes to store that on. You have to back up that data. That length of time it takes to do that backup increases the more you have. So, I do advise my clients, be mindful of what you're actually collecting and using because you may be liable one day for it, and at the end of the day, it's something. The cup can only get filled so much before it starts to overflow. All right, great points. All right, well, let's talk real quick about industries and business size. So what kind of industries do you see falling victim to attacks like ransomware infections when it comes to these claims being filed? And I'm going to sort of the two-parter here. What size businesses are being targeted and how will that impact my decision to get cyber liability insurance?
Sure. So Joe, I'll jump in here, and then maybe you can give from the big 30,000-foot view for what. But over the last couple of years in the news, we've seen the largest of businesses, if you will. We've seen the Targets, the Baltimore Cities, the Colonial Pipelines, and ironically, one of the largest insurance companies out there, CNA, which is one of the carriers we use for their cyber liability product, just experienced a huge sophisticated cyber attack ransomware, and it was just made public that they paid a $40 million ransom to unlock their stuff. I'm oversimplifying that. So it can happen to the largest of businesses, but again, the reason why we're here is, the last year and a half, we've seen these cyber attacks come to the mid-sized businesses and and even the one-person's shops. Last year, a dental IT company that supported hundreds of Maryland dental practices experienced a data breach cyber attack. Subsequently, that reached out to several hundred of our customers, and we were able to see firsthand the damage that can do to our customers and the small businesses. For those that had insurance and made the decision to purchase that insurance, they were certainly a little bit better off with that. We were seeing the average ransoms on the small side right around $40,000 per small business, with an average claim of over $50,000. And that's where I really became passionate about it. And then just a couple weeks ago, one of our healthcare providers experienced a data breach through phishing. I know that we talked a little bit about that earlier. Where one of his employees, clicked the link, and he and his office right now is in the claims process. And we'll talk about the importance of the insurance company and the role that they play, in addition to, from a financial bearing, but the ability that insurance company can really play quarterback through their claims process. So the bottom line, that before I turn it over to Joe, is regardless of your size of business, cyber liability insurance is a must-have for everybody. And I want to repeat that again. If you're a small business owner, regardless of your size, it is super important that you work with folks like DP Solutions to get your IT, technology needs in place properly. And then you need that catch-all. You need that cyber liability. You need to transfer that risk to an insurance company. So again, businesses of all sizes is what we're seeing, from the small to the biggest of the big.
When we, a little how we make the sausage, when we put together these questions and had this content for the slide deck, this was before Colonial Pipeline occurred. And so the inclination when people hear about what happened with Colonial Pipeline, and we've talked about this in the media and stuff like that recently. You can look at our website and LinkedIn for more information. But Colonial Pipeline makes big headlines. SolarWinds makes big headlines. So does FireEye and Baltimore County Public Schools. But what doesn't make headlines are the ransomware attacks that hit every day to businesses that you deal with in the community. Doctors' offices, law firms, financial services businesses, retailers, manufacturers. It runs the gamut. The truth is that if you have something to protect, they are looking to attack you. And indeed, when it comes to actually deploying ransomware, there's a whole sub-industry on the dark web where people can purchase ransomware as a service and begin, sort of develop their own ransomware enterprise, if you will, for cybercrime. So they don't really care who you are or what you do. They care about how much juice they can squeeze out of it.
Yeah, and Ben, one more thing that I'd like to add, as a small business owner myself, and I know there's lots on the call here, our reputation is super important. And to use that example of that IT vendor from a year and a half ago, I'm not quite sure that they're around. And so working with a quality IT professional firm like DP Solutions and a quality insurance carrier for the risk, they'll actually manage your reputation, because we want to make sure that our businesses are up and running as quickly as possible. And we want our patients or customers or what have you taken care of, because we want your customers to stay your customers.
Yeah. All right, Joe, do you have anything to add to this industry stuff? We touched on a lot of this, but I want to make sure you have a chance to jump in.
I think Tim did very well. The only thing I would throw in is, just because we've got a lot of statistics around this, is I would just throw in some numbers that Beazley has seen just to back up exactly what Tim said, which is the last year that we have full year numbers for is 2019, because we haven't finished compiling everything for 2020. But in 2019, 62% of the cyber incidents that we saw that involved ransomware involved what we call small and medium-sized businesses. and 38% were middle market or larger risks. And that kind of goes with what Tim and both Ben were saying, which is people don't think when they hear Colonial Pipeline, they don't think that can happen to me because it's not relatable. But what we see is while those do make the headlines, most of our incidents happen among the small business segment and not the larger business segment. And then the other thing I would point out is how big of a growth spurt that ransomware has seen. From 2018 to 2019, we saw the reported incidents just that Beazley handled jump over 100% from 340 ransomware incidents in 2018 to 775 in 2019.
Wow.
And again, we don't have the full numbers yet for 2020, but I anticipate it will be as big or bigger than 2019. So it's a growing issue, and what we like to say about as far as the question of what industries is, ransomware is industry agnostic. They just find anybody who's willing to pay.
Yeah, the statistics for phishing attacks continue to rise as well, especially as it becomes outside, extends outside of email and goes into things like social media or other platforms where they can deliver these sorts of things. So there's no reason to expect it to turn around in terms of actual incidents. Honestly, the one thing that is probably going to ultimately stop ransomware from being a practice is if we can somehow stop it from being effective, and that's very difficult. So in the meantime, the best thing you can do is be prepared. All right, I'm going to keep moving forward, and I wanted to get into some examples. So what are some recent examples of attacks you've seen in your experience, and how did the presence or lack of insurance impact the recovery process and management of liabilities? So I kind of, for this one, we were kind of hoping to get a good cop, bad cop scenario, something, a really good, successful situation where the organization, was prepared, but then unfortunately we have to talk about the dark side too. What happened? How could things have been better for certain organizations? What are the telltale signs of someone who's not prepared?
Sure. I can jump in there. It's obviously a business is better off, obviously, with cyber liability than without. And the main reason, in addition to, I think I mentioned it too just a minute ago, it is not only the sheer cost of all the players that are involved that somebody has to deal with in the event of a data breach, but just the quarterbacking that the claims team does to kind of guide the customer through the process. There's many of different players involved that one has to deal with. I had the opportunity last year to really micromanage a couple claims processes from start to finish, and I saw the value of claims adjusters reaching out. I saw the attorneys involved. I saw the email communications between the negotiators, the folks who negotiate what they call them the bad threat actors, the bad guys, if you will. I saw the email exchanges of negotiations between ransoms, and it was like the wild, wild west. It was unbelievable. And I watched the insurance companies at the small business level really pay those ransoms, really work with the customers to get them back up and running as quickly as possible. I watched them work firsthand with their IT providers like DP Solutions to assist with equipment needs, so on and so forth, to really work. So that's the good of a bad scenario. I also had the opportunity to see several customers who had no coverage at all because they didn't know what they didn't know. So I've sold several policies myself over the last year to small businesses where these business owners have paid out of pocket, $80,000 worth of ransoms, and they're still not quite sure did they do everything that they needed to do from a notification from a patient standpoint. So I'm going to oversimplify it in the sense that not only is there a huge financial burden in the event of one of these attacks, but not knowing what to do is equally as important. So you really do need a quarterback to kind of guide you through and coordinate the attorneys, the forensic accountants, the law firms, your credit monitoring, your ransom negotiators, and then DP Solutions of the world. It really makes a lot of sense to have somebody that you can go to as an expert.
Yeah, and just to tie into that a little bit too, you also want to be in a position when it comes to a ransomware incident, and this was some advice I gave recently to someone who asked about it in an interview, which is essentially be in a position where you're doing other recoveries other than having to pay the ransom. So if you're in a position where an insurance company is maybe paying you to do, technology recoveries, installing new hardware, et cetera, that's a lot better than paying off ransoms, because when you pay off those ransoms, you're going to actually be targeted more in the future. It kind of perpetuates the attractive low-hanging fruit aspect of these kinds of ransomware incidents. Joe, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think Tim nailed that one.
All right, great. There are so many examples. Again, we put this together before Colonial Pipeline. I mean, that's just one example. And in Baltimore, we had both around the same time, I guess it was around January or so, the turn of the year, you had both the GBMC and the Baltimore County Public School ransomware incidents. Both, I don't have all the details at my fingertips on them, but GBMC recovered a lot easier than BCPS. They had a little bit more of a plan. They were a little bit more prepared to respond. It's not that they got through it without cost. It's that the pain point was just significantly more for the school system. All right, well, that's it for the prepared questions. So now we want to get into the user Q&A. Please, while you guys are getting your questions in, if you haven't already got them in, I'm going to plug a few things real quick. First of all, make sure if you aren't already connected with Tim and Joe, be sure to do so. You've got their email addresses right there. You can also, I imagine, reach out to them on LinkedIn, as you can for me. My email address is right here, bschmerler@dpsolutions.com. You can check out our website, dpsolutions.com, or my LinkedIn or our LinkedIn to see all the content, not just stuff about this insurance stuff, but we're always putting out information about IT best practices, making good decisions with technology, even if it's not with us or anything like that. We want to make sure that people do the right thing. We're also offering a free cybersecurity consultation, just a brief 30 to 60-minute engagement where we can talk about sort of where you stand on your cyber risk and what we can do to help. And then also, real quick, we've got our June webinar coming up at the end of June. We do one at typically the last Wednesday of every month, except for Christmas, because nobody wants to attend a webinar around that time of year. But we're going to be dissecting the Colonial Pipeline attack. People read these headlines in the news and they hear about this stuff, and it's very overwhelming. What is it, and what, if they can't protect themselves, how can I protect myself, and so on and so forth. And I just want to break it down a little bit. What actually happened that we know about? What were things that could be controlled? Why is it so impactful? What can we learn? How can we make our own cybersecurity better as a result of learning these things? So make sure to check that out on the events page. So now I'm going to hand it back to Jill, who is collecting our questions. Jill, what do you got?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We do have a question came in. What is the average cyber policy amount coverage?
So I will take that one. It really depends. It depends on so many different factors. It depends on industry class, kind of what type of business it is. It depends on the size. It depends on the size of your network. It decides on revenues. But so it can be anywhere from several $100s a year to several $1,000s a year. But it really just depends on the industry and the business, because what we try to do is there's not necessarily a kind of one size fits all, because different businesses have different needs. So my best advice is reach out to kind of who your insurance broker or professional is, and just have that conversation with him or her.
And I imagine, and here's a Ben question, I imagine preparedness is a part of it as well. How steeled are you to preventing these kinds of incidents from happening? The more risky you are, I imagine the more expensive your policy is going to be, if you could even get a policy.
Okay, yeah, we got a follow up from that. He said he actually meant more about liability coverage, $3 million, $5 million more.
I didn't get that, Jill. I'm sorry. I didn't.
Yeah, he said he actually meant more about amount of liability coverage. Was it $3 million,
Okay.
$5 million?
Okay, so and Joe, please chime in here, because you probably have the statistics. Typically, what we sell we sell nothing less than $1 million in terms of a liability coverage. We do have customers, based on size, needs, contracts, so on and so forth, obviously increase that. But Typically, nothing less than $1 million of coverage is what we see, and then obviously there's various deductibles and so on and so forth. The customer can decide based upon their risk tolerance.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to what Tim said. You know, unlike say property insurance or your auto insurance, where there is a defined value to what your car is or what your property replacement cost would be, because cyber insurance is still so new, it's really difficult to know exactly how much you should buy. And so what we usually recommend is kind of start with whatever your professional liability limits are. So if you're carrying $1 million, then that's kind of the baseline. If you're carrying $5 million in professional liability limits, therefore you think that that's what the value of or your exposure is, your cyber should probably be very similar, because I think Tim could probably come up with many examples of insureds who thought they had enough cyber liability and wound up not having it. So it's really, as he said, with the pricing, each situation is unique, and Ben could talk to this far more than I could, but the cost to restore your network due to a security breach or data breach is going to depend upon how big your network is, how many different servers you've got, and how much data you've got to restore. So that, the cost of forensics can pile up very quickly. And so it's really, you just need to talk to your insurance professional. They can usually come up with some benchmarking for companies that are similar, either in industry class or size, and give you good advice as sort of a baseline. But my answer is buy as much as you can afford, because it's what you're going to make you sleep better at night when it comes to that time.
Yeah, getting to Joe's comment about how costly it could be for recovery. I mean, there are situations where a computer, a device or a server or something could get ransomware, and using some of the more sophisticated recovery solutions, you could just wipe the machine away, ransomware and all, and then deploy a new clean, server image or something on this, and be just as you were maybe a few hours before the ransomware incident. Obviously, there's an investment involved in that. Of course, that is maybe more desirable than paying tens of thousands of dollars to a cyber criminal who probably will unlock the ransom and give you your data back, but there is no guarantee, unfortunately. I mean, there is no honor among thieves. So, so just keep that in mind too. There may also be a compliance aspect to this as well, which is to say, look, it doesn't, just because you have 50 gigabytes of data and somebody else has 50 gigabytes of data and they're both considered PII, your PII might be more special because you're in the healthcare industry, or you might be in the a government contracting space or something like that. So there's going to be a lot of factors that lead into it, which is why it's important to talk to professionals when making these decisions. Jill, what other questions do we have?
Yep, certainly. With the explosion in cyber claims, do you see policy issuance moving to non-admitted carriers? Did you catch that?
The end of that I didn't hear quite well. Do you see
Okay.
insurance moving to
Non-admitted carriers.
not admitted carriers?
Okay, so I can jump in there as an insurance carrier who has both admitted and non-admitted paper. One, it's going to depend upon the venue, because certain states are a little bit more difficult venue for admitted paper. But the other thing is the typical idea behind non-admitted paper is, because you aren't having to file with the state, the form can be changed much more quickly and can evolve with the coverage. And so what we saw for probably the 8 years ago on until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the forms were changing so rapidly that most carriers were offering the coverage on non-admitted forms because we could update them more rapidly. Now that the coverage has stabilized a little bit, we aren't changing it as often. Beazley, for example, offers a lot of policies on admitted paper. But now I think we might start swinging in the other direction, where the difficulty of insuring some of these risks, like ransomware, will cause more non-admitted markets to cover more and the admitted markets to run for the hills, because they can't change their rates rapidly enough to keep up with the exposure. So it's one where I think right now the average insured can find admitted and non-admitted depending upon the venue. Tim, I don't know if maybe there's anything I left out that you might want to add there.
No, I think you nailed it right on the head.
Wow, some inside baseball there. All right. Jill, anything else?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? If not, I can have Ben ask the question.
I think we can hear you all right.
Okay, yeah.
It gets a little echoey at times, but I think we're getting it.
Sorry. I got a
That's okay.
cybersecurity Q&A checklist, but I'm not doing everything on it. Is that a bad thing?
Yeah, so I mean, so the reality is that if you look at any kind of checklist that asks a billion things about what you're doing for technology, there's a good chance that you're going to say no to something. You got to consider the motivations. So first of all, if it's an insurance company sending you some kind of cyber insurance questionnaire or a compliance group, it may have nothing to do with insurance, but somebody asks you one of these questions, they're trying to cover themselves in pretty much every possible way. They know very little about your organization. They don't know whether your stuff's hosted locally, in the cloud, both, hybrid, how big your organization is, how many people you have, how much data you have, what legal liabilities you have, the assessments you've done in the past, all this stuff, they have no idea. So they're just going to toss everything at the wall. That said, there's going to be some baseline stuff, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier in the presentation, that you're going to have to do no matter what, which is to say you are going to have antivirus, anti-malware, maybe endpoint detection. You're going to need to have encryption set up when you're sending sensitive data between locations. You're probably going to have some kind of security awareness training in place so that your users are aware and engaged. You're going to have some kind of login management and authentication management so that accounts themselves are actually protected, that it's just not a screen door for people to just walk in and have access to your stuff. They're going to ask about things like VPNs, which are often a good idea to deploy in certain scenarios. Once you get into some of the other sophisticated stuff, there may be questions of applicability. So, for example, sometimes there may be log management tools or SIMs or other things that are very high-end security products that may not fit your organization. And so you might not necessarily be afraid to say no to some of those things. They may not just make sense. It all matters about the context. One of the things we do and what we would recommend for anybody, again, whether you're working with DP Solutions or anybody else, is to have regular technology reviews with a professional and say, hey, this is the business we're in. This is the type of data we hold, the legal concerns we have about protecting these things, the business concerns we have about protecting these things. You know, basically laying it all out there about who you are. Forget about the technology. Talk about who you are as a business. And then say, as a result, this is what we do with our tech, and what can we do to protect these potential weak links on the chain. When we're talking about data protection, there's all sorts of potential flashpoints where data could be lost or stolen. The goal of a good IT management solution is to say, okay, what are all those potential holes? What can we do to at least address them, plug those holes up in a reasonable way, so that, again, you can't guarantee that the house doesn't catch on fire, nothing can, but what can we do to make sure that we've sort of covered our bases and shown due diligence when it comes to this stuff? The worst thing, whether it's insurance or compliance or anything else, is to have your head buried in the sand. If the government, God forbid, comes in and says to you, hey, you just were the victim of security breach, what were you doing? And you said, well, nothing, because I don't care about my technology. They may not look very kindly about that. You may represent more threats, whereas an organization that is doing a lot of the right things may be looked at a little bit more favorably. Notice the FireEye breach that happened earlier this year, which was a cybersecurity company that may have been attacked by a foreign, a quasi-governmental entity. We don't really know. It's not been made entirely public. People aren't chewing them up because the threat was so novel. They were doing the right things, but the threat was so sophisticated and so engineered that they were a victim. Whereas many of these victims of ransomware could have done things to avoid them in the first place. You don't want to be in that bucket. And again, if you have more specific questions about that, I'm happy to engage offline.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, we do have one more question that came in. What is the process like for submitting a claim if I did have ransomware?
All right, that's a good question. So if I am a policyholder, and this is to Tim or Joe, either one of you guys, and something bad happens, all my computers are locked up, I need to get on the phone. What's that process like? I mean, obviously it's very scary, especially if you've never gone through this before. Walk me through that.
So for a client who experiences a cyber liability claim, your first point of contact is typically your insurance professional, your agent. In our world at R.K. it would be us. We would then take that information and we'd get it right out to the carrier, and very shortly claims adjuster would be, did you lose? Am I still here?
You're good.
Okay. A claims adjuster would be assigned. And then what we do is we try to pair that claims adjuster with the client very quickly, and then that claims adjuster then becomes the quarterback, if you will. And the claims adjuster takes that ball and starts to run with it. All the carriers that we work with are very good with that. And the goal is to try to get our customers at ease as quickly as possible and give them the sense that, you know, they're going to be taken care of as quickly as possible.
So it sounds like there's a pretty strong hand-holding process, if you will. You know, you don't have to be some expert DR planner or something. I mean, obviously you should have a DR plan of some kind, but you don't have to be a guru when it comes to this stuff to be able to manage the process with the insurance company.
No, absolutely. At the end of the day, you know, what us and the carriers are doing is we're selling, you know, a promise to take care of somebody if something bad happens. So there's nothing tangible that we sell other than a promise. Mm-hmm. So in good insurance agencies, good insurance companies, the one that we work with really do a fine job of upholding that reputation of maintaining that promise.
That's great to hear. All right. Jill, do we have any other questions?
Nope, I don't see any other questions.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you so much to the audience for the questions. We really appreciate them. At the end of the day, this is about you. We want to make sure we're addressing the things that you're looking out for. I'll just wrap it up real quick. Again, all of the contact information is on the screen. All of our email addresses are here. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn too if you want to connect that way. Please be sure to take advantage of our June webinar, as well as the cybersecurity consultation if that's of interest to you. Thank you so much for attending. Be safe out there. Reach out if you need us, and have a great day. And thanks to Tim and Joe, of course.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.